Joining me now, national political correspondent for Politico, Meredith McGraw, and NBC News political reporter Alan Smith, as I welcome you both. Meredith, so you just heard there from two senators about Trump's pick for Attorney General. Former Congressman Matt Gaetz, what are you hearing from your sources on whether Gaetz has a shot at being confirmed?
Well, I think as you've just heard from lawmakers there are some members of Donald Trump's cabinet picks that seem like they will have a pretty clear path to confirmation. We're talking about people like Senator Marco Rubio, who Trump has tapped for Secretary of State, or Elise Stefanik for UN ambassador. But some of his more recent picks could really cause some headaches up on the Hill for Trump and his team. In particular, of course, Matt Gaetz. Julie had some great reporting there about how many Republican senators have expressed that they have concerns about him actually being able to get confirmed. And Matt Gaetz is somebody who hasn't exactly lined up a lot of allies or friends on the Hill over the years. And so him getting through, I think Trump's team and Trump himself are determined to see him become the attorney general. But how that happens remains to be seen.
Yeah. Alan, you share a byline on a report about Trump's new Department of Government Efficiency, which of course will be co-led by billionaire Elon Musk and Trump's GOP primary rival, Vivek Ramaswamy. They're going to be tasked with reining in the government spending and downsizing the federal workforce. But you write that there are serious doubts over whether the agency can accomplish that. Can you explain why?
Well, I mean, first off, Alex, this is an advisory committee. So ultimately, no matter what they do, it's going to be recommendations made to the broader Trump administration and Congress to carry out. Now, when it comes to government spending, Congress is going to have to play a huge role there. And, you know, we've heard Elon Musk talking about cutting potentially $2 trillion from the federal budget. It's going to be extremely difficult to do that without touching Social Security, Medicare, defense, you know, a number of programs that Donald Trump didn't really express very much interest in cutting. And it's interesting in hearing from Democrats so far, when they're asked about this new sort of advisory committee, they are pointing to, well, we hope that we can make some cuts to the defense budget, get some of the bloat out of defense spending. They have viewed this as, at least early on, an opportunity to highlight an area for cuts that they have talked about for years. So it seems as if people are approaching it with an open mind, but ultimately, given that this isn't an official government agency, these are going to be recommendations that are made. Now, the only other thing I'd add is that when it comes to cutting the bureaucracy, they might have more leeway there because they're going to be making those recommendations to the Trump administration. And a lot of those things can be done without Congress. So we will obviously see how this goes in the early days.
100%. All right, Meredith, President-elect Trump has now picked Chris Wright, the CEO of a fracking company, to lead the Department of Energy and also to serve on a new National Energy Council. Wright is a climate science skeptic who has said global warming is a myth. Does tapping him for energy secretary mean addressing climate change will not be any part of Trump's agenda?
Well, we heard over the past few years as Donald Trump campaigned for president that two of his big goals starting on day one would be to fracking and to pull back President Biden's Green New Deal. And Trump has, repeatedly talked about how he's assailed President Biden's Green New Deal and some of the green energy pieces of that legislation. And so I think that's going to be a huge priority for Trump and Wright, as Trump has said, starting day one.
And you contributed, Alan, to another recent article reporting fresh off Kamala Harris's defeat, there are about, 24 or so Democrats already jockeying to position themselves for the 2028 presidential election. So what names are topping that list, and how much will opposition to Trump play in leading the Democratic Party out of the political wilderness?
Well, I mean, seemingly everyone with a brand in the Democratic Party right now is someone who's being mentioned as a potential future leader. I mean, look, right now, coming out of the 2024 election, it's not even clear who the leader of the Democratic Party is. So there's going to be a lot of jockeying for that position. Now, look, Democrats that I spoke to, they noted that the governors are going to have an inside track here because they're going to have the ability to combat some of the stuff that the incoming Trump administration is going to do from an executive position. They're going to have more power than some of these members of Congress who don't have the majority. And obviously, Vice President Kamala Harris is going to be out of a job come January. So she's going to have less ability to influence the conversation moving forward. These are people like Gavin Newsom, who announced a special session last week, visited Washington, Capitol Hill, and the Biden White House to set the stage for trying to protect some of the programs that he's got in place in California. You've seen J.B. Pritzker, Josh Shapiro, Gretchen Whitmer. I mean, the list goes on and on.
Okay. Meredith, lastly, your book, Trump in Exile, it presents an insider's view of Mar-a-Lago, this after Trump's 2020 defeat and the January 6th riot. And a new Washington Post article reports beyond the celebrations happening right now at Mar-a-Lago, a lot is not going according to plan. Despite the transition team vetting some of the cabinet picks, Trump has reportedly been operating off his own script, as evidenced by his choices of Matt Gaetz, RFK Jr., Pete Hegseth for these top positions. What are you hearing from inside Mar-a-Lago and Trump's approach to filling out his cabinet?
Well, it's very different, I think, than what we saw in 2016, where candidates were paraded through the lobby of Trump Tower and were really on display for the press and the world to see who was coming in and out of these meetings. This time, it's all being held behind closed doors at Mar-a-Lago. There's one room in particular where there are TV screens set up so that Donald Trump can review people's news and TV clips and their TV hits, because, of course, we know that television performance to Donald Trump is an important piece of all of this. And, you know, there's been different events going on at Mar-a-Lago. He has been getting calls and visits from friends and allies and different people getting in his ear about some of his candidates. And some of it has come together pretty last minute. If you think about somebody like Matt Gaetz, that was the decision that was made on the flight up to Washington, from Palm Beach, the same day that he was going to visit President Biden at the White House. He had been disappointed and not really feeling some of his other candidates for attorney general, and Matt Gaetz was on the flight, and here we are. So some of it is not really people that we had heard about or had been on the list for some of these different positions, but have just come up in conversation, and Donald Trump has gone with them because he really is trying to fill out a cabinet of loyalists and fierce defenders who are going to be enacting his policies starting on the first day.
Okay. Meredith and Alan, you guys, thank you much.